my presentation on the Bishop Museum. Honolulu's Bishop Museum is a cherished and vital member of the community, which comes from the fact that for more than a century it has been the world's premier conservator of Pacific Island treasures when it was founded in 1889, these islands were the sovereign kingdom of Hawaii. The Bishop Museum carries out an important legacy of the namesake of this museum is Bernice Auhi Bishop, the great-granddaughter of King Kamehameha, the great unifier of the Hawaiian Islands. It is no surprise, then, that the Bishop Museum's first collection were important heirlooms from the monarch appeared in Hawaii. And to this present day, the respectful care and preservation of these treasures is of the utmost importance within the hallowed place, whose founding mandate established great trust and expectation. Perhaps the museum's acclaim derives in part from the fact that it's never been content to just function as an exhibition hall. From the outset, the Bishop Museum has tirelessly engaged in pursuit of knowledge across Polynesia and the entire Pacific region in the tradition of famed museum anthropologist Keith Emery. Let's first start our tour off here in the Hawaiian Hall, which you can split into 3 different floors or realms. The first floor represents the expanse of the sea, or the kahiaki, which is of oceans, migrations, and the birth of the islands. The second floor represents Waho Kanaka, or the realm of people and daily life. And the final floor is the Waho Lanai, or the heavenly realm, that of the gods and the high chiefs. So now let's take a look at the first floor, where the first thing we're looking at is a scale model made with actual stones from the site of Wahela Hua, a temple built on the Hawaiian Islands, built in 1902, and the temple stood for 800 years until it was actually recently in 1997 demolished by lava flows. You can see that it was made to scale and through the archaeological dig itself. What's interesting about this is only people could order the construction was the chiefs, and it had to be consecrated with the sacrifice. Next we come to some kehihis, specifically the one on the left, the Kahu. The god Kahu, there's only 3 of those left in the world. One's here, one's at the British Museum, and one's in a museum in Massachusetts. So last on this floor, we look at the Haliki, which is traditionally built, it's not found or anything, traditionally built homestead from Hawaiian culture. It's the last traditionally built one. After this, they stopped. All the artisans stopped being able to know how to make them. Recently, there's been kind of a revival in it, but this was the last traditionally made one. You can see a scale model of it down there, like the inner structure. Here's a better picture of the kahihi. We move on to the second floor, which is the realm of man. Start looking at specific tools that were used and made for daily use, including some weapons of war, some ropes. The stuff you see hanging from the ceiling would be just recreations of boats, but I can see some rough sling stones in there. They've been found at different sites. What I did notice specifically is not a lot of dating for a specific time, like a year range, but more like, well, it belongs to this specific age, a generalized time, but not a lot of dating. The dates I saw on here were the date it entered the collection. No other kind of dating methods I saw were used, which is unfortunate to me because I wanted to figure out when some of this stuff, not when it came to the collection, but when it came from, a more specific time frame. You see a lot of attention to fishing, and more cultivating the natural environment rather than kind of farming and stuff like that. But you also notice around a common theme around the Hawaiian artifacts is you'll see a lot of wood, a lot of stone, and even animal bones being used more for their tools and weaponry and containers rather than just pottery and stuff, just based on what they had. Not to say that devaluates their culture's importance, but it's just interesting to see how the shape's made the same, but in the same sturdiness, but it's made out of wood rather than clay. You start seeing like thatched hats and different clothing, different ways that the common person would adjust to the elements and stuff as we move along. So the last little bit, we kind of see at the end like weapons. I guess even there's lots of interfighting and like King Kamehameha unified all the different tribes under one group. And you'll see throughout the thing there's a lot of interactive elements that'll help teach the average person how they would operate a different tool or stuff like that. But unfortunately, a lot of those persuasions were closed off during this time. But they did pay attention to not only the aspect of here's this thing, but they also showed you how one would go about using the item as well, which I found. Which I wish we could have done it, but unfortunately we weren't able to do that. So let's move on to that third round, which is around the gods and the chiefs, which, and a lot of times in Hawaiian culture, which you could say are one and the same as they'll depict here. Even goes to the fact that there are gods for specifically that would their effigies would sit behind the chiefs in their temples, in their huts. So that being said, like that's why they kind of one and the same in this group, and this is where you can start seeing that some of these items might be from personal collections from like the original, where the original art collections came from. So what I found interesting, these are actually necklaces worn by the higher people in the society, made out of whale bone and teeth, which they didn't hunt for whales per se, but they would go out and use every little piece that would come from when one would wash ashore. These are those specific chief gods that would sit behind them, and even they would say like rule in their place if they were out. They kind of revered like all sea life, and it's all interconnected. That's why all floors have some sort of level of the sea involved into it, which is a lot to say when you're a seafaring nation. You can see now the progression. We're going to different levels, and we're going into more of the modern era. But after this, now we're going to move on to outside just the specific Hawaiian region, and kind of compare and contrast how we can kind of compare and contrast how the Hawaiians and other Polynesian around the Pacific, how they kind of differ but are also similar in the same way. Here we go into the Pacific Hall. This is the first John F. Stokes, the first curator. And here I like to see they start showing you more the archaeological side of stuff in early Hawaiian archaeology. One thing I liked about this display was kind of half open. They actually showed you the levels of a dig site, and inside those levels they had different pieces of archaeological finds. So I could actually pull the top level. They had an iron hook, and then down a level or two below you saw a bone hook, and so on and so forth. I found that kind of showed me that they had some sort of thought into this, but not. I just wish there was more of the dating and the scientific aspect of it, rather than just being a collective, is what I see. It's a great collection showing lots of history. And now we can start seeing that in Oceania and specifically these top ones were from Fiji. You can see they have clay in them. So, which I found, just going from what I saw at the Hawaiian Hall to this hall is really interesting. So now we move down to the second floor, and you'll see different mock-ups of different boats and that were used across Oceania. To see some different outfits, and again, what I found most troublesome is the dating aspect. I couldn't figure out exactly what time period these came from, and I would go through each one and see. It was very detailed on what it was, where it came from, when it came to the collection, but not from what time period it is, which I was looking for my research, but I'm sure that information, they have an extensive library and study in part of this whole campus too, which I'm sure some of that information might be in there as well. But there's over 24 million different artifacts inside this collection. That being said, I guess maybe it's hard, but again, these are that's my one big critique of this. But they are big as far as the community outreach in this. Even when we were there, they had traditional Hawaiian music playing in the background. They brought a band in, and they go out to site and they bring special exhibits in. When we were there, I didn't get it on camera, but they had a history of surfing exhibit there. So they bring a constant rotation in. And normally they'll bring storytellers in to bring stories to life of the Hawaiian island. So it's a very interactive and community outreach thing, and even is on the National Registry of Historic Things. But thank you for your time. I hope you enjoy.